Give us a minute to live stream. Excellent. All right, we can go ahead and call this meeting to order. This is the March 3rd, 2022 meeting of the Audit Committee. And I will begin with a statement that this meeting is being conducted in accordance with California Government Code Section 54953E in consideration of the coronavirus. And all members of our Audit Committee and staff today are participating via teleconference. Members of the public may observe this meeting electronically by accessing the meeting instructions via the agenda posted on our website. In addition, public comments can be sent to me at andrea.pizano@svcleanenergy.org, and they will be read within the public comment period. Or you may raise your hand using *9 in the attendees box. With that, I can go ahead and start with the roll call. Chair McIntyre.
Here, present.
Alternate Director Lopez.
Here.
Director Abe-Koga.
Here.
Committee Member Rahman. Oh,
Here, sorry.
Great, thanks so much. And we have a quorum, all are present.
And then I think we should note the guests that are here, in particular, Mike Mayer and Brett, and also Brett, who's your Jenna, yes, and Jenna. I'm sorry, I can't see everything with the screen here. And Amrit and Garish as well.
Yes.
So forgive me, I don't have an agenda in front of me.
No worries. Let me go ahead and share this. And Director Mekachuk will be leading us as chair of the committee until we have appointed a chair for 2022. So at this point, we can go ahead and move to public comment. And I don't believe we have any attendees. I will go ahead and close public comment and we can move on to the consent calendar. And so there are two items on the consent calendar. One is to approve the minutes from our last meeting in August, and the other is to direct staff to pull committee members for our next meeting date. Do any members of the committee have questions? No questions? Okay, we can open it up to public comment. No public. We can bring it back to the committee for a motion or discussion.
Do I hear a motion?
I make a motion to approve.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Roll call vote, please.
Thank you. And we will start with you, Chair Mekachuk.
Aye.
Alternate Director Lopez.
Aye.
Abe-Koga.
Aye.
You, Rahman.
Aye.
Thank you. And that motion carries unanimously. And next on our agenda, we have a welcome and audit committee overview from CFO and Director of Administrative Services, Amrit Singh.
Okay. So first of all, I want to welcome you guys to all the audit committee members to the committee. Thank you for making yourselves available and for being on our committee. We're very grateful. So Andrea will bring up the slides. I'm just going to give a brief overview of the committee's roles and responsibility, and then I'll hand it over to Brett to go over the financial audit. So we'll roll forward. Welcome everyone. Again, appreciate you being on this committee. So the main purpose of this committee is to oversee the financial audit, oversee the external auditor's audit of our financial statements. As you know, our fiscal year runs from October to September. So this is the fiscal year that ended September 30, 2021. Just a reminder that the auditors are working on behalf of the board to review management's work. At the conclusion of the audit, which is the point where we're at right now, they will be presenting a letter that will identify any material weaknesses and deficiencies, and that letter will be presented to the board. With the audit committee's recommendation, the board will receive the audit, and per our policy, we have to do this within 6 months of the close of our fiscal year. So that means next week, the board can accept the audit, and we can finalize our financial results for the year, for the last fiscal year. We'll go to the next slide, please. So this is at this stage of completion of the audit. So this is the time when the committee members can engage in discussions with the external auditors and ask if there were any material risks and weaknesses that they detected, especially detected any weaknesses in our internal controls. Were there any restrictions that were placed on their scope of the audit? And if they have any recommendations that they may have for the committee. This is also the time when the committee can assess the performance and independence of the auditor. And after Brett and Jenna make their presentation, we ask that the committee vote to recommend that the board accept the results of the audit findings. Okay, so that's the scope of the financial audit. And we'll go to the next slide, Andrea. In addition to financial audit, SVCE, we also conduct 2 IT audits that's also within the purview of this committee. At the last meeting we had in August of last year, we went through some of our audit findings and IT audit findings and remediations that we were undertaking. So after the financial audit presentation, Kevin and Nick will walk us through the annual IT audit that we do. This is our own undertaking. And the primary focus of this audit is on cybersecurity, making sure that we don't have vulnerabilities that expose us to unacceptable levels of cyber risk, other IT type risks. Normally, we start this audit in springtime frame, so we're getting ready to launch our next audit. And then we report back any remediations to the audit committee, and we'll go through the last audit and the remediations we've taken since that audit. The other audit is a Cpuc-Directed Ami Audit. This is to ensure that we are handling customer data properly. And this audit is held every 3 years, and this is one of the audit years. We are currently conducting an AMI audit, which we expect to file with the commission in April 2022. And again, Kevin and Nick will go through those audits as well, or the AMI audit as well. Next, I'll talk about the timing on the next slide. The timing of our meetings. Per our policy, this committee meets at least twice a year. The first part of it is to either retain or appoint an independent auditor and review the audit plan. So this is something last year we did in August. And then the other meeting is to review the audited financials, which is the purpose of this meeting. For this remainder of this year, we're proposing to have 2 audit committee meetings, one in August and one in September. And the reason for that is that we have to select a new independent auditor. Per our policy, we have to competitively bid audit contracts at least every 5 years. And this is Vicente and Brinker's 5th audit. So we are planning to issue an RFP sometime in spring and summer. And then we want to bring the results of the RFP and our recommendation on an external auditor to the committee in August. At that point, we'll ask the committee to approve or give us direction on the selection of our independent auditor. And then we need about a month's time to basically put in a contract in place with that auditor. And then in September, we will ask the selected auditor to come present the audit plan and kick off our next financial audit, which will be right along the time when this current fiscal year will be closing. So that's our game plan, but we're open to suggestions from the committee. And that's all I had for the overview. If there are any questions.
Could we go back to the agenda for a moment, please? Oh, okay, so I'm sorry. So this is just the overview. We're on that ends item 2. Is that correct, Amrit?
That is correct. Yep.
Okay, so then we're on 3. And then 4, we'll receive the audit report. And then 5. And let's do 2 or 3. Let's do number 3. And then I would almost propose that we change the orders of the day and do 5 before 4. And my reason for that is that I'd like to have a discussion of the IT audit update before receiving the audit report. And then my other comment on this is I'm a licensed CPA by trade in Canada, but not in the United States. And I have a fundamental kind of difference in that I believe as a member of the audit committee should be able to have a discussion with the auditor without management being present. And I know that, Brett, we had this conversation last year, and the solution was having that discussion not in the public forum, but having the audit committee authorize the chair of the audit committee to have that discussion. And Brett, can you make a comment on that, please, just before we go forward?
Sure, agreed, Director Mekicek. And I believe that's on offer today. Amrit, is that correct?
That is correct. We can leave and the audit committee can still have a discussion with the auditors. It will still be a public meeting under the Brown Act.
Okay, so we could do that during the meeting today. Is that correct?
Correct.
Perfect. Okay, sorry, I didn't understand that in the meeting. Okay.
Could I just mention something? Amrit, that part of the meeting won't be recorded, correct?
Andre, are we required? I know it has to be a Brown Acted. It cannot be a closed session. That's a direction from our general counsel. The recording part, I'm not sure. Andre, do you know?
I would assume that since this is a public meeting, we would continue to record.
So going back to Chair Mekicek's issue, if you're meeting without management, this meeting is currently being broadcast on YouTube, right?
Correct.
Right. So the whole point of confidentiality, there's no confidentiality, is what I'm saying.
Right. Just for the other board members, one of the requirements of an independent audit committee is to understand if there's been any disagreements with management over the accounting, and if management has limited the scope in any way, shape, or form through the audit. And as an audit committee member, I need to have that assurance and verify for my professional standards or my professional obligations that is in fact the case before I could then be part of recommending that the audited financial statements and the audit report be received. So that's kind of background where I'm coming from with this, and I know that in a public setting in California with the Brown Act, it creates a weird sort of difference, and that's what's going on. The Brown Act didn't consider audit committees when it was put forth.
So one thing, Brian, you can do is you can have a discussion on your own with the independent auditors, and so can other board members, as long as you don't end up constituting a quorum.
Right. So what we had agreed to last year for the 9/30/20 audited financial statements is that the chair of the audit committee would have that conversation independently with the auditors. And if there were no issues raised, then the recommendation to recommend, or sorry, then the audit committee would have recommended that the financial statements and audit report be recommended for approval to the board. And I'm sorry, Margaret, you had a comment or question, or your hand is raised?
Thank you. Yeah, so I guess just procedurally, because this wasn't noticed as a closed session item, I don't think we can do anything without the public. So I guess my question is, do we need to approve this today for our next board meeting, or do we have a little time where we can schedule, or actually it sounds like maybe whoever the chair is would have that conversation, and then we would schedule another meeting to approve the audit for the next board meeting. Perhaps.
Or the
I think the way we handled it last year, and my memory isn't perfect, it's reasonably good, but it's not perfect, is that the approval of the financial statements and the audit report were dependent upon no issues being found in that one-on-one conversation, if you will. And if there were any issues that would change the recommendation, then we would have had another meeting. And do I remember that correctly, or is it pretty close to being?
Yes, I was actually going to suggest that.
Okay.
So I'm sorry, has that conversation occurred this round or no?
No, that has not occurred yet.
Okay.
It would occur afterwards.
Okay. So do we have the time to table the item 5 then until the chair has that conversation, and then we could schedule another audit committee meeting?
No, I'm not communicating this very well. I'll try it a little differently. Today, we could approve that the recommendation of the audit report and the financial statements to the board, provided that a subsequent conversation in the next 24 or 48 hours or 6 hours doesn't yield a reportable event where that recommendation would change. Okay.
Great. That sounds good. Thank you.
Are we all on the same page? Yes? Okay. So then let's move to the item 3 on the agenda, which is the chair and vice chair, I
Great.
think.
Yes, correct. Thank you, Chair. So this item is, of course, to select the 2022 Audit Committee Chair and Vice Chair. By way of policy, somebody who has served as chair can serve again. There are no term limits on this, and anybody from the committee can be selected from amongst yourselves as representatives as chair and vice chair. So at this time, I'm happy to answer questions or take any nominations.
And we're doing both the chair and the vice chair.
Correct, or we can split them up and we can address the chair, and then once that concludes, we can then focus on vice chair.
Okay. Margaret, you've got your hand up.
Yes, I was gonna nominate Director Cpuc if you would be willing to serve a second year as chair. And I'll just take that one first. I'd like to nominate Director Cpuc for chair.
I'd like to second that motion.
And I would accept the nomination, and if there's another nomination. No other nominations?
I'd like to nominate Margaret for vice chair if she's willing to serve.
Thank you.
I'll second.
So we have a second motion, or a second motion and a second of that, and a second of that motion. Or, so we're doing it in one motion, is that correct, for chair and vice chair?
We could do that if that is at the committee's preference.
Yes, I can amend the motion then to add the vice chair. If the seconder is okay with that.
Yes.
Okay. Then with no other nominations or motions, then a roll call vote, please.
Thank you. And we will start with alternate Director Lopez.
Aye.
Thank you. Director Cpuc,
Aye.
Director Abekoga,
I
Committee Member Rahman.
Aye.
Thank you. And that motion carries for Director Cpuc to serve as chair and Director Abekoga to serve as vice chair of our 2022 Audit Committee.
Okay, well, thank you and welcome, Margaret. And then if Amrit, if you could give us just a little background and refresh my memory again on the IT audit on the cybersecurity from 2020 in 2021 before, in how that, if that was completed and what the results were, just because I think that should be before the actual audit itself.
Well, that actually is the presentation that Kevin's going to go through. Yeah,
Okay, I'm sorry.
no worries.
Great. So just to confirm, Chair, we are moving to item 5.
I would prefer us to move to item 5 and Brett, and I can't see. Oh, and there's Jenna. Is that okay with you? Because I would like to feel better or understand what happened on the IT side before hearing about the financial reporting side. Is that okay, Brett?
Oh, you're asking us?
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. As long as if I have to step away for a moment, you are patient with me for half a minute.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Okay, there we go.
Great. Thank you, Chair Cpuc and members of the Audit Committee. So yes, this will be largely an overview of previously completed audits and the remediation steps that we've taken with regards to those, as well a bit of a preview on audits upcoming and underway. So I'll be presenting with detailed support from Nick Zanato, our Senior Management Analyst who's in charge of IT efforts for Silicon Valley Clean Energy. Next slide, please. So at a high level, and Amrit described two of these in his intro, we do three types of audits overall, or we have done them. The first is an IT audit, which really focuses on vulnerabilities within our existing systems. And the latest iteration was completed in September 2021. We also recently completed a security review and gap assessment. So another layer of cybersecurity audit. And that really focuses on things we have not yet done, future threats that are out there that we can then increase our response and add activities and tools to help counter. And we did that for the first time this past year, and that was completed in December of 2021. The third type of audit is the mandated CPUC mandated advanced metering infrastructure, or AMI audit. And that's really about customer meter data and our ability to keep that secure and the policies and procedures that we use to protect that. Thank you. And and that is just starting as of early this year with results due to the CPUC in April. So it is underway at the moment. Next slide, please. So in our August 2021 meeting, we talked about this IT audit, which was conducted by Hutchinson and Bloodgood under subcontract to Abbott, Stringham and Lynch. It was our fourth annual audit. And every year that we've done this audit, we've added an increasing level of complexity to the number of items that we review. It is focused again on existing systems and current practices. That's both our tools. So it goes through processes like penetration testing, where the outside auditor uses tools to try and find vulnerabilities within the system. And it also reviews just our overall process and policy and control setup. So they look at our IT policies. How are we training and onboarding our staff? What are our rules around IT usage, around security and passwords and things like that? So again, this audit is really focused on our existing systems. Next slide, please. The second audit, which I described, which is this forward-looking audit, was handled by a firm called Securicon. We did our first assessment of this type last year. It's really looking at things that you hear about in the greater parlance. So ransomware, phishing, things that go beyond the systems we have in place and the vulnerabilities that they have. And so just a little bit of talking about existing vulnerabilities. That, for example, involves things like patching software, making sure you have the latest security patches and updates. Making sure that the systems are configured to allow only specific levels of access to the right users. So that's the kind of look that we do at existing systems. Future viewing, or sort of the broader cybersecurity landscape, requires you to think of things that, of course, haven't happened yet. Very fortunately, we have not had a ransomware incident, but those are the types of things we want to think about in advance, make sure that we're prepared for, and then to the extent possible, train ourselves to avoid them and then deal with them if they should happen. So there's a big focus on human behavior and security. I've mentioned training, and that's something that we're engaged in on an ongoing basis, and how to use our tools most effectively to protect the organization and our data. This assessment was based on something called the CIS Top 18 framework. And we have those top 18 sort of criteria listed in an appendix if you're interested. We'd be happy to talk more about them in detail at any time if you're interested. But broadly speaking, they cover an array of features looking at how an organization can protect itself, respond, identify, and we'll talk a little bit more about those different types of criteria in just a second. Next slide, please. So speaking of the 2021 audit and its findings and remediations, there's no single score or grade that we get. We are in the process of internally working with outside consultants, primarily Securicon, to think about, and potentially upcoming consultants, to think about how to come up with a more succinct and cohesive way to kind of explain the state of our cybersecurity posture. But the IT audit itself, which again focuses on existing systems, really gives you a long list of remediations that you undertake. And this is something that Nick's been working on since the IT audit completed in August. And so using those findings, we find and fix things like configuration errors, user profiles that either are no longer needed or are set incorrectly. We use it to add tools to our arsenal to protect against things like malware, to block spam emails better. And then we work on training with our staff, both in terms of how to use these tools, how to identify threats that come in. We have tests that occur each month with regards to phishing, where we have phishing emails that are sent to staff. and we track how they're responding to these. So again, all of this is focused on existing infrastructure. But then, like I said, it really goes beyond just tools into just the human firewall side of things, but also, our processes. So in response to this IT audit, one of the things that we've done is we've looked at our vendor agreements and our contracts to look at the data breach and security security protections that we have in them. And so each year we work with our outside counsel, Richards, Watson, and Gershon, to update our agreement template to reflect sort of the current state of knowledge and risk assessment with regards to not just confidentiality and contract language in a general sense, but specifically data usage and the use of data by our consultants and clients. So this really is a new step that we've taken to help protect us in the case that one of our vendors or contractors has data that they're using for work on behalf of SVCE, and really how to sort of protect ourselves should something happen to our data when it's in their possession. Next slide, please. So I talked briefly about this idea of an overall cybersecurity posture. And again, that IT audit that completed in August 2021 was about finding vulnerabilities in our existing architecture and our existing policies. And that used what I had told you was the CIS Top 18 framework. At the bottom, there's a note, and what it says is CIS is essentially one of several frameworks that the IT and cybersecurity industry use to gauge your overall posture. CIS Top 18 is very prescriptive and looks at in specifics, and another one called NIST is a bit broader and more flexible. And we're using that one to align sort of our future efforts, given that it has sort of a broader scope. And that scope is broken into 5 main categories: identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. So really 5 stages of dealing with what you would call a cybersecurity incident or threat. So going through those quickly, identification, that's really about knowing what your risks are and where your vulnerabilities are. So an IT audit would be part of that. Deploying tools to really understand your system and monitor the state of things, to identify vulnerabilities, like a patch that hasn't been updated yet, and then update those as fast as possible. Protecting, that's really about building that firewall, both on the technical side and the human side. So an example of what we've done is we implemented a password manager across the organization. We've required that unique, strong passwords be used for all critical tools that staff access. And by using that password manager, we can track how effective our staff is at keeping those up to date. So when a password system requires an update, we know who's been, really following along with those requirements. The third one is to detect. And, ideally we wouldn't get to this point. We'd identify and protect ourselves and hopefully not go any further. But you of course have to prepare for this potential possibility. And that would be, what happens if an event does occur. So one of the things that Nick has worked on with outside consultants is using technology within the systems that we have to identify where logins are coming from. Now, this requires some extra work on our behalf when staff travels, but we think that's a valid trade-off to not have the exposure to international logins. I mean, a lot of the tools we're now using are cloud-based, which of course is great for flexibility. In the COVID scenario, it made remote work much more feasible, of course, without having an email server located in our SVCE office. But based on that, that's accessible from everywhere. And so by trying to limit access in that way, we're protecting our data and our network and our own users much better. If an event were to happen, the next step or stage would be our response to that. So what do you do when something happens? And with regards to that, we're in the process right now of implementing and developing a specifically oriented to cybersecurity response plan, so called an incident response plan. And so we're in the process of developing that, and that will include what's called tabletop testing. So we'll have a scenario play out with staff where we actually go into a imaginary but hopefully realistic cybersecurity scenario where we then have to act out what that response would be. And so it's a test. It's a test of us and our capabilities and our knowledge of how to deal with an incident should it happen. And then the final element of this, the 5th element, is recovery. So that's really looking at, an incident's happened, perhaps data's been compromised. What do we do about that? And so really we're deploying backup solutions. We're fortunate that our data is, again, sort of cloud-based for the most part. So we have a file storage system that we're then backing up in the cloud. So we have multiple copies should something happen. Should we lose access to one copy, we can reinstate that and work from there. Another part of response and recovery, of course, would be dealing with any ramifications of data loss. So that's going to be part of the incident response plan and part of any sort of response effort that we have should something happen. Nick, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Sorry. Yeah, so like on this slide, this is just one example for each of the categories, but we have a slide further in the index or the appendix that shows multiple items that we've done per category.
And as I mentioned, we're happy to get into deeper discussions of specific tools and specific strategies that we've undertaken. Those are things that we'd love to discuss sort of offline rather than in the public setting, because of course, everything that we mentioned could be used against us, and we'd prefer to be safe and secure as much as possible. So we're open to that discussion at any time should the committee look to have that. Next slide. The final of the 3 audits is this mandated audit, this AMI audit. So this is one that, again, Amrit mentioned, the CPUC requires every 3 years. It's on a specific triennial cycle, and 2022 is this go around. The results will be due in April, as I mentioned, and we started a bit early given our work on our IT audit with Abbott, Stringham and Lynch to get ahead of the queue of CCAs. Because this is CPUC mandated, each one of the CCAs will be needing to do this same audit in the same time frame. So having it underway early has been helpful from that focus. And then, as I mentioned, this is a broad audit. The scope of it comes from the CPUC, and it focuses on our controls around this AMI meter data from our customers, as well as more general sort of IT-oriented or audit focuses like patch management, which I mentioned, our IT governance, backup and recovery, as well as our policies and procedures. So one of the great things about doing this with Abbott, Stringham and Lynch is having had them just complete our IT audit in 2021, a lot of that work is primed and ready to just be slotted into the response to the CPUC in April. So it speeds up that process considerably. So I'm going to pause there for a second and see if there are any questions, since that's mostly the recap. And then I'd like to sort of just highlight the steps that we're going to take next. Okay, feel free to stop me at any time, but let's move forward. Andrea, next slide, please. So this year, we could continue on our traditional path, which would be to repeat our traditional IT audit. As I mentioned, each year that we've done this, we've increased the scope, and that's outlined in an appendix slide with a number of different categories that we've used to evaluate our own existing systems. So that would be sort of status quo process. We would do a 5th annual audit. We would add additional tasks to that list, but it would pretty much happen on a similar time frame to what we've done in the past. Start in the spring, end mid to sort of fall, remediations proceeding afterwards. The second pathway, which we're currently evaluating to determine whether this is a pathway that makes sense for us, is to essentially, I guess, merge 2 of the IT audit structures that we've been working on. One is the existing IT audit, which focuses again on our existing systems. And the second was this security assessment focused more on the broader threat landscape out there. And so what we've been investigating is the potential engagement with a virtual CISO or CISO, which is a virtual Chief Information Security Officer. So for a organization or a firm of our size, having a full-time CISO would be overwhelming. But we want to have the skills and the background and the knowledge to guide us towards the solutions that we need to have to be protected. So there are a number of firms that provide this service in various different formats, and that's really what we're evaluating right now. They can be a single consultant who acts as an expert resource. It can be a managed service with a team and a bunch of tools, or a bit of a combination of those 2. So right now we're working through that process to shortlist and look at a number of firms and what the offerings are there. And based on the initial feedback from the review of proposals, what we could do is essentially weave our traditional IT audit into this process. By having a virtual CISO on board, we could then start the audit essentially under their watch, and then use that information to really outline and prioritize our next steps. And that would all be done based on our size, our revenue, the risk to us, based on the types of tools we have and the industry we're in. So it would really take a little bit more structured look at that rather than just kind of repeating what we did plus some more. So we're in the process of evaluating that and looking at what that would look like from both a cost and timing perspective. and we'll be able to report back on that shortly. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, right now, we're in the process of putting together this formal incident response plan as part of that NIST framework. We're looking at the pathways for which way to implement our IT audits in 2022. And we're getting ready to present, or we will be ready to present findings in mid-2022 as they become available. Now, those are likely to be preliminary findings, depending on the timing of that meeting, but we will present what we have at the time when that meeting comes. Next slide. And that's all. If there's any interest in any of the information we mentioned in the appendices, we'd be happy to share that now. And as I mentioned, we'd be happy to talk about any of these efforts in more detail offline at any time.
So I have several sort of questions, and one of the things is I've been doing some work with the Cpuc with respect to water utilities, and I know that a lot of things that are related to infrastructure are kept out of the public domain for the exact reasons that you just mentioned, Kevin. You know, it is security, and with what's going on in Ukraine and possible cyber the importance of cyber security is huge. So I understand that. Let me verify that there's nothing that Silicon Valley Clean Energy does that has anything to do with the delivery of electricity. Is that correct?
I was going to see if Girish or Amrit wanted to respond, but
Yeah, that is correct. The physical infrastructure part of it is managed by the California ISO, and then the wires and transmissions are also physically handled by PG&E.
Right. So from an infrastructure perspective, in terms of keeping the lights on, there is nothing where someone could come into Silicon Valley Clean Energy and turn the lights off. Okay.
Correct.
So it's all financial, operational, and to some extent data security with respect to customer information. And the other audit, the once every 3 years, is dealing with the customer data side.
that's correct.
Okay. And so then from a financial perspective, which is fairly important, were there any procedures that were done in the IT audit with respect to Mayor accountancy? And I know that you're looking inside of Silicon Valley Clean Energy, but Mayor is a Silicon Valley Clean Energy outsources, for lack of a better term, a lot of services to Mayor. So can you just talk about that at a high level, Kevin?
Yes. So as I mentioned, the IT audit, the traditional IT audit focuses on more of our traditional IT infrastructure and systems and policies. To my knowledge, and Nick, please confirm, it did not look at any of our external vendors. One of our hopes, I would say, is that engaging a service like this virtual CISO would lay out for us some of those issues that we should then dive deeper into with our external partners. For example, like Maher Accountancy, with Calpine, who handles our billing data. So a number of those. And we'd be happy to work with them and report back on their own individual efforts. But Nick, would you like to elaborate?
Yeah, the internal IT audit does not audit the actual vendors, but our contract agreements does have vendor data responsibilities and requirements. So we do look at it from the contract side of things. And then if a vendor is going to be working with customer data or PII data, we do run them through this audit team that we have that actually looks to see if they're SOC 2 compliant and looks to see if they're doing vulnerability scans and those types of things. So it's not part of our audit, it's more part of our new vendor process.
Okay. And then shifting gears, the having the CISO and the audit, those are, I heard you at the very end saying they're not mutually exclusive, that you'd be coming up with, here's how those two pieces could fit together in more of an optimal format. They're not mutually exclusive.
That is correct. That is correct. As I mentioned, this forward-looking security assessment, it was our first iteration this past year. So we're absolutely looking to find ways to manage those together and make sure that the work that comes out of a more traditional IT audit scope, looking at our existing policies and systems, feeds right into this more forward-looking assessment of where outside risks are and really helps guide us towards prioritizing which of those risks to address first.
Okay. For the rest of the audit committee, those are my questions and that's addressed my concerns. So thank you. If there are other questions or comments. Seeing none, do we have any, there was no one else from the public, I don't think, that have attended, but I guess we have to open the public session and close the public session. So we'll open it and see if there's any comments from the public. Seeing none, we'll close the public session. Okay, so do we and I don't have the agenda in front of me, do we have an action that we need to take on this, or do we just accept this?
No action on this item, Chair. This was a discussion item.
Okay. So that being said, we'll move on to item 4 on the agenda, which is a discussion with our auditors. And I'm not sure if there's a presentation. There we go. And Brett's back with us.
Well, sounds like we're going to take it from here. Thank you. Hello, everybody. It's good to be back once again. I know there's a lot of new members of the committee. We could advance one slide, please. My name is Brett Bradford. We've been working with my firm, Pisani and Brinker, with Jenna's help with several CCAs around the state for, gosh, going back, I think, near the beginning. So 6 years or so. So as was mentioned earlier, this is our 5th year, and we do hope to be able to return again, of course, in the future. We could advance one slide, please. Please feel free to interrupt me with any question whatsoever. The purpose of our meeting with the committee, of course, is information exchange and not for just to me to read off these slides, of course. So on our first slide here, the audit's near completion. So the reason it's not completed fully is we want to give the committee an opportunity to review the draft financial statements and look everything over before we pull the trigger. That's from my perspective, provides the best outcome. Of course, once we do go final, we do not like to change things. So that's why we're here today. So that said, though, we do expect to issue an unmodified opinion, also known as a clean opinion, which means that based on our audit, the financial statements are materially accurate. And also, we have not identified any significant deficiencies in internal control. That's auditor speak for saying we didn't find anything where there's a process that was really broken too. Processes, of course, limited to being those surrounding the production of the financial statements and the financial information. Advance, please. This slide just kind of talks about the relative roles and responsibilities. Management is responsible for preparing the financial statements and establishing a system of internal control. Management in this context is, of course, Amrit and his team, and Maher as well as part of his team. The auditor is responsible for auditing the financial statements, and we do that by considering risks of material misstatement in the financial statements, considering internal controls relevant to the preparation of the financial statements. And then we go proceed from there to perform tests of year-end balances based on the results of our risk assessment. And then we also evaluate the adequacy of disclosures. Of course, the whole presentation format of the financials is dictated by governmental GAAP. There's a lot of statements there, so there's a lot of very specific items that need to be in there based on those requirements. And if we could advance, please. And part of our risk-based procedures, our risk assessment procedures, we gain an understanding of the entity's operating characteristics, practices, and procedures. We compare that to our knowledge of similar entities, industry, and professional guidance. And then review the procedures and controls surrounding the significant transaction cycles and business processes. And we do that by observing the performance of the control, interviewing staff, looking at documentation that demonstrates that the control was performed, things like that. Can you advance, please? And I believe now I'm going to hand it off to Jenna.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to be talking about some of the areas that we focused on during the audit. High level, this is not an all-inclusive list. These are going to be some more of the specific areas we focused on based on risk assessment, which also includes dollar value. So we reviewed policies and procedures for various types of financial transactions. As Brett mentioned, we interviewed staff, we work through payroll, revenue process, accounts payable process. We also consider the ongoing impact of current economic conditions. So how this specific industry is dealing with any effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. Getting into more of the nitty-gritty of what tests we actually performed in terms of revenue recognition. So when we looked at accounts receivable and revenue, we test a sample of customer billings. Silicon Valley utilizes Calpine, so we will actually request their blue bills, trace through some payment. We also will look at total cash received during the year. So we see some wires into Silicon Valley's bank statements, compare that to revenue recorded. And then we will also look at cash received subsequent to year end, relate that back to AR, going back to our sample of customer billings as well. Those are both procedures performed at the same time. We also review revenue recognition through year end and the method for determining the accrued revenue. So this is going to be energy that has been purchased or used by customers, but not yet billed. As you all know from your personal energy statements as well, usually that's a weird time period. It might be mid-month to mid-month. So we're making sure that the revenue that Silicon Valley can record is recorded as of year end. Next slide, please. For cash, we send out confirmations to financial institutions. We maintain control over directly sending and receiving those to ensure that there's no other interference. For the accrued cost of electricity, we review subsequent bills from electricity providers and then the cash payments. So that is going back to ensuring that the cost of electricity is complete for the year under audit. We want to make sure that any energy that has been purchased and used during the time period is properly recorded on the books. For other liabilities, we will review contracts and other support to determine completeness of amounts recorded. And as Brett mentioned in one of his earlier slides, we will look at the financial statement note disclosures prepared by Maher Accountancy, make sure that they're complete and without bias. Next slide, please. I'm going to pass this back over to Brett.
Thank you, Jenna. So these slides, and I think these Director Mekachek will address some of the requirements that you mentioned, if not all of them. So these next few slides, so under our professional standards, we're required to make certain communications to those charged with governance, and in Silicon Valley's case, that's the board. So the first one, the significant accounting policies adopted by Silicon Valley throughout the period audited appeared appropriate and consistently applied. That's a good thing. No alternative treatments of accounting principles for material items in the financial statements have been discussed with management. That means there was nothing that could have gone either way in terms of a material presentation in the financials, nothing like that. And if you could advance, please. We're not expecting to propose any adjustments to the financial statements. We won't be unless something very surprising were to happen during the course of this meeting. We have not identified any significant or unusual transactions or applications of accounting principles where a lack of authoritative guidance exists. Advance. There have been no disagreements with management concerning the scope of our audit, the application of accounting principles, or the basis for management's judgments on any significant matters. And we have not encountered any difficulties in dealing with management during the performance of our audit. Advance, please. That concludes our slides. Happy to dive into any area relating to the audit, answer any questions now.
So before I open this up for questions from the committee, and then after that from the public, I do have two brief questions. What do you anticipate the date of your audit report to be?
I believe we are shooting for tomorrow. Is that correct, Jenna? That's everything is queued up for tomorrow.
Correct.
Okay. And maybe Brett, for the other audit committee members, you could just briefly describe the significance of that, the audit report date.
So the audit report date is the end of field work is what they used to call it. Now field work isn't necessarily these days done in the field, but it's essentially when we've obtained all the information necessary to meet our professional judgment as well as the professional requirements to render our opinion. And that'll be the same date as the representation letter, which is, and we provide the template of this to management, and that's a letter back to us from management saying, yes, we've given you everything. Everything is stated in accordance with GAAP. It's got a bunch of assertions like that, and that date will match our report date, and that will be the final piece of data we need to conclude and provide our signed audit report.
Okay. Then my second question is, here we are in the pandemic, and as I look across, or we're getting through it, accounts receivable and the estimate for doubtful accounts. I know that management has an estimate in there, and I know at the board level, we were talking about different things, different programs. I guess obviously management is comfortable with the allowance for doubtful accounts, and I just wanted to make sure that the auditors are comfortable, and if you could just maybe give us some color on that.
Sure, you bet.
And maybe Amrit, you should start a little bit, and then Brett, you finish that off. And maybe it's Mike, I'm not sure if he's still here.
Yeah, from management perspective, we have noticed accounts receivable increasing. One thing that about accounts receivable we should note is that we have a California arrearage payment program from which we're going to be getting about $1.3 million our customers will be getting, that will be offsetting their bills. So that will start actually this month. In our mid-year budget, we are budgeting towards a very high end of what we think we could be exposed to, and that's about $2.9 million. I know Mike can speak to, from an accounting perspective, I believe he increased the allowance for bad debt by about $1 million this year. Mike, you want to touch on that?
Yeah, so typically what we'll do as we go throughout the year, we have a expected percentage of uncollectible accounts. It's based on historical averages. But during the pandemic, certainly historical averages were not going to cut it. Things were looking worse. So not a big surprise. We saw that across the board. Luckily, in the industry we're in, the utility industry, people still tend to pay their bills. So it was worse than normal, but still, all things considered, not that bad. So in any event, we did increase our reserves at the end of this fiscal year. And we think that's actually a conservative estimate because likely some of the amounts that we have written off or reserved for may come through in the form of the cap relief funds. So we do think that's a conservative number. And to put in perspective, I don't think we're carrying many accounts older than 9 months on our books. Is kind of general ballpark of things that are not even considered to be collected for our conservative estimate, when in reality, some amounts beyond that will be collected. So I don't have all the specific numbers and ratios in front of me, but it is our stance that this is a conservative estimate at the end of the year. And some of it will likely be collected this month or the next couple of months through the CAP program.
Okay. Brett, comments?
Sure. From the auditor perspective, we primarily approach it analytically, and we look at the aging buckets of the receivables and see if something is 90 days late, for instance, okay, we should start thinking about should that feed into a reserve. So we look at that and then talk about it with Mike and Amrit, and also think about the current economic context, of course, and keep that in mind as well for adequacy. And at the end of the day, yeah, we're signing off on that as appearing to be adequate as well. Like Mike said, it looks like it increased about 1.1 million. So we're satisfied in that regard.
Okay. My follow-on question is, I know, Mike, that you do accounting for other CCAs, and is what you're seeing in Silicon Valley Clean Energy similar across the other CCAs?
Similar in the sense that there was absolutely a statewide increase in uncollectibles. It tended to be more pronounced in areas and geographical locations that had pre-COVID had worse collection rates. So over the Silicon Valley territory has, before the pandemic, had one of the best collection rates of all the CCAs that I work with. And so while things got worse, it didn't get as out of hand as some other, I shouldn't even say out of hand, but the increase was less pronounced for Silicon Valley. And that's probably just due to the same reasons why in normal circumstances, the rates of success are pretty good. So you're faring off better than most CCAs on the whole.
Okay. Do other members of the audit committee have questions? No? Then I think we'll open the public comment period. And looking, there doesn't seem to be any attendees. So hearing none, we will close the public comment and bring it back to the board. What do we do now from an action item perspective? It's a question for Andrea.
Well, the initial request from staff was for the audit committee to recommend that the board receive the audit report from Pisenti and Brinker and accept these audit findings. However, I know that you wanted to include a clause following your discussion with the auditors. So if somebody would like to make a motion which includes that, then you can vote on that motion.
Understood. Before we get the motion, what I think is important is that the audit committee know that it's an unqualified audit opinion. And are we getting in the audit? So that's a statement. Now my question for Brett or Jenna is there or do you do a statement on the management side, the internal control side, or do we not have a statement on that?
So so we're certainly required, if we have any significant deficiencies or material weaknesses, to communicate those to the board. We received the request this year as well. We can also, under our standards, provide a letter that says we have not identified anything in that regard. And so we've been requested to do that. So we will provide that. That's in a separate document, but that's queued up for delivery tomorrow, I believe, as well. Right, Jenna?
Correct. And if I'm not mistaken, Kevin, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I believe a draft of that letter was included in the packet sent out to the audit committee. Is that correct? Yes. Okay. So that will be finalized tomorrow as well with the financial statements.
Okay. So that said, so we understand what we're going to have a motion on. Shall we call for a motion? And Margaret, Vice Chair, you've got your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to go ahead and make the motion to accept the audit report and pending the discussion with the chair and the auditors, recommend that the board approve the audit report, accept and approve the audit report. I think that hopefully that's right. You can correct my motion if I need to add anything.
I think Andrea's got it, but we'll need a second for that.
I second.
Got a second. Just before we have a vote on that, I would like to explain in just a little bit more detail that when Brett went through the communications, he basically went through those communications that management had cooperated with them, etc. There were no disagreements, and it's just to dot the I's and to cross the T's that discussion should take place without management present, and it would be before the date of the audit report. So that will probably happen. That discussion would happen later on today, if that's good with you, Brett and or Jenna. Okay.
Yeah, I think it will be a pretty quick conversation, and I've got the availability to make that happen. So.
Okay. Roll call vote, please.
Thank you. Chair Mekachuk,
Aye.
Vice Chair Abikova,
Aye.
Director Lopez,
Aye.
Committee Member Rahman.
Aye.
Thank you. That motion carries unanimously.
Okay. And then taking us back to the agenda, what's our next item?
Being that we swapped item 4 with item 5, that was the last item on our regular calendar, and we are now on committee and staff remarks.
I think Jen and I are going to take our leave unless there's any questions for us. And then Andrea, will you arrange for a quick, whatever the format is for later?
Brett, since we have scheduled a meeting through 2, if you could just keep yourself available, after we stop the recording, we'll reach out to Chair Mekachuk and arrange a meeting.
Sounds good.
Yeah. How about we do this, Brett? I will give you a phone call as soon as this meeting ends. Just make it real easy.
Yeah, I'm gonna put my, there is no chat. Do you have
Yeah,
my?
no, I saw on your last slide, there was your phone number.
Yes, yes.
But why don't you,
I can tell you.
perfect, go
Direct
ahead.
direct cell line 707-483-2557.
707-483-2557.
Mhm.
As soon as it ends.
Okay, thank you, everybody.
Remember, this
Thanks.
is going on YouTube.
Pardon?
Oh, I said, Brett, remember, this is going live on YouTube.
I
Now
can't-
everyone
yeah,
has your phone number.
The tidal wave of calls I'm gonna get is gonna be unmanageable, I'm sure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks. Okay. And so, I'm sorry, the final thing we have to do?
The next would just be any committee or staff remarks.
Staff remarks, okay.
None from me.
Not from
Unless there are
staff.
any questions.
I think we're good then. I would like to say that thank you to everyone, and I would not anticipate we're going to have any issues after I make my phone call. So unless you hear back from me in the next before 5 p.m., I think we'll be good. Okay. Shall we adjourn the meeting? Yes?
Yes.
No penalty. Anything else, Garish, that you'd like to say?
If staff could just stay back after the meeting, we'll stop the recording and debrief. Thank you. Thank you all for participating.
Okay,
Fine,
so
thank you.
the audit committee will leave the meeting. Okay, thanks everyone. Bye.
Bye.